So we do this by contacting our legislators, mobilizing volunteers, writing to local papers, and hosting events like this one. If anyone's interested in learning more about our upcoming events and opportunities for action, check out the links that Eric's going to be dropping in the chat. We have our Mobilize page, which will always show all of our most current events and actions, and our social media pages. And if anyone's interested in volunteering, also please let us know. We'd love to connect with you. So tonight, our event is the third installment of our Community Conversation series. It's a series that aims to bring together community members to discuss climate issues and their relationship to our personal wellness. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so we are very excited to be offering this event this month. In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we have with us tonight the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. HWCA is a grassroots and nonpartisan coalition of diverse healthcare workers. They welcome students and trainees in all healthcare disciplines, as well as active and retired healthcare workers, clinical and non-clinical, from any New Hampshire healthcare related setting. Their mission is to educate and mobilize colleagues, patients, family members, community members, and policymakers in support of climate solutions that improve health for all. So I want to say here just a huge thank you to our speakers from NHHWCA, Deb Gerson, Bob Dewey, and Bob Fader. We are so looking forward to hearing from you guys. To our attendees, if you have any questions for our speakers as we're going through, please feel free to put them in the chat box throughout the event. We will have a couple of minutes at the end for a Q&A following the presentations, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and hopefully facilitate some discussion with our panel speakers. So please send those questions along. And with that, I am going to pass things over to our first speaker. I believe, Bob, you're up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Dewey. I am a retired cardiologist from Catholic Medical Center here in Manchester. And I'm here with Deb Gerson, a pathologist, and Bob Fader, a psychiatrist, and we're all on the board of New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. And I appreciate that nice introduction. You saved me part of my talk, so we can move right ahead. I just want to say our mission. I just want to reiterate our mission. You know, we are trying to make climate change a little more personal to people. It's a little abstract to a lot of people, talking about the polar ice caps and polar bears and whatnot. But when we talk about our own health, our children's health, and our grandchildren's health, that's very personal. And we're hoping that will make climate change a little more immediate to people and will help ignite people to ask and demand climate solutions. So we'll go ahead from there. Next slide, please. This is a talk that we consider this our lay people talk, and it's something that we've been giving to service clubs, libraries, and different groups, and we change it up a lot, and we're going to focus, because this is Mental Health Month, we're going to focus a lot on mental health aspects. We usually have a section on the science of climate change, but I think this is a pretty savvy group, so we're going to just do a little bit of that. Then we go in and talk about specific health problems, and then we'll close with some solutions and suggested actions. Next slide. So I think everybody on this call knows that climate change is due to the greenhouse effect, and the greenhouse gases, primarily CO2 and methane. So that's in our first couple of slides, but I just wanted to focus a little bit on this Ipcc report from late 2021, which came out actually about the time our group was coming together last fall. And it was kind of I think a call to action to many. And this was the first report where they said unequivocally that all this warming is due to human activity. The conclusion was the climate had changed 1.1 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial era in the mid-1800s. And that even if the world went carbon neutral today, we are still going to reach 1.5 within a couple of decades, probably mid-2030s. But more concern to that, actually, New England and New Hampshire happens to have the distinction of being on the leading edge of this whole process, because in New Hampshire, we've already warmed 1.5 degrees C. We're ahead of the rest of the world, sadly. And in fact, the Gulf of Maine is in the 90th percentile for warming bodies of water. The Gulf of Maine has actually, temperature of the Gulf of Maine has actually risen a full 5 degrees Fahrenheit since the 1980s. So quite concerning and a little closer to home. A few of the other, okay, and a few of the other facts on that slide is that the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is unmatched for at least 2 million years. Sea level rise is happening faster than in 3,000 years. Ocean is warming faster than any time since the Ice Age, and you know the ocean has really been our buffer. Unfortunately, that's warming up, and we're going to lose that buffering effect going forward. So next slide. This is a slide looking at likely scenarios. It's kind of a busy slide. There is time on the x-axis and CO2 emissions on the y-axis. And as we all know, the Paris goals were to try to keep us below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to do that, we really need to quit burning fossil fuels by 2050. And we have to be halfway to that goal by 2030. And that's the blue line. And you can see up above that, the little yellow line is what's labeled pledged policies. That's what the countries promised to do in Paris. And then the red line above that is actually what's actually happening right now. So we are actually on track, maybe going to 2.5 degrees temperature rise, maybe 3. Unless we can really get these emissions under control more quickly. Next slide. So how does climate affect our health? Let's first just talk a little bit about the magnitude of the problem. This is an editorial from the New England Journal of Medicine that ran last fall, entitled "Call for Emergency Action to Limit Global Temperature Increases, Restore Biodiversity, and Protect Health." This editorial actually ran simultaneously in 240 medical journals that same week last year, which is unprecedented. Nothing like that has ever happened in the medical community. And this editorial was really a wake-up call to healthcare workers of all types to say, hey, you need to know about this, you need to be able to treat your patients about this, and you need to start using your influence to try to influence the climate debate. Which we are trying to do. And at the same time, last fall, the World Health Organization said climate change is the #1 health emergency worldwide. The Global Burden of Disease study that was in the Lancet last year concluded that there were 9 million premature deaths in 2021 due to air pollution. That compares to the same year in 2021, there were about 3.5 million deaths from COVID. So you can get a sense of the magnitude of this health problem. Next slide. So this is what it boils down to. We have increased levels of CO2 leading to rising temperature, going to more extreme weather, and then rising sea levels. And all of that spins off into air pollution, changes in vector ecology, increased allergens, water and food quality impacts, environmental degradation, extreme heat, severe weather. And you can see all of these cause certain health problems. Before going further, I just wanted to say a little thing about increasing allergens. As a cardiologist, I used to see a lot of patients that had COPD. And for the last 15 years, we've noticed that our COPD patients would decompensate in the spring and summer much more than they had previously. And many times I would call their pulmonologist or their allergist and say, boy, do you think we should give him a run of steroids and whatnot? And the allergist would always say, oh my gosh, this is so bad. This is the worst pollen we've had in years. And honestly, 15 years ago, we would hear this and we'd kind of roll our eyes and say, guys, you say that every year. But in fact, next slide, that's exactly what was happening. This is a graph of the growing season in New Hampshire. And you can see that in the last 50 days, the growing season has lengthened by 34 days. So In fact, pollen starts being made a lot earlier and it goes longer into the fall. At the same time, the increased CO2 in the atmosphere is a driver of photosynthesis. You know, that's what photosynthesis uses. That's one of the fuels of it is CO2. So not only is the pollen season longer, it's more intense. There's more pollen in the air. And studies have shown that along the East Coast, pollen concentrations in the last 10 to 15 years are up 40%. So we're seeing a lot more decompensated lung disease as a direct result of the warming planet and the increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Next slide. We're going to talk now a little bit about outdoor air quality. Next. And this goes back to carbon-based power. Whenever you burn carbon of any kind, whether it's solid coal, liquid gasoline or diesel, or oil for your furnace, or natural gas, air gas, you create ground level ozone and small particles called particulate matter. Next slide. I just want to focus a little bit on particulate matter in this case. It comes in 3 different sizes. There's PM10, which is less than 10 microns in diameter, PM2.5, less than 2.5 microns in diameter, and ultrafine particulate matter, less than 1/10 of a micron. And this diagram, this picture shows their size relative to a human hair. Now keep in mind that a red blood cell has a diameter of 8 microns. Next slide. Now, if we drill down on this a little bit more, PM10 comes from road dust, wildfires, and demolition. PM2.5 comes from burning fossil fuels, and ultrafine PM comes primarily from tailpipe exhaust. Now, these can worsen COPD. They can be a trigger to asthma in kids and adults, and also particulate matter is a carcinogen. But from a vascular standpoint, as the way the cardiologist looks at this, is the PM10 is very irritating to our upper airway passages. But the scary thing is that the PM2.5 and ultrafine particulate matter can actually get inhaled deeply into your lungs, and they can get into the alveolar sacs, which you see in this diagram, and they can actually cross the capillary membrane because they're just so doggone small. And this can lead to vascular events such as stroke and heart attack. And in populations that live, in a downtown area that maybe they drove a highway, built a highway through, that are constantly breathing truck and automobile exhaust. Studies have shown that in these populations, you can actually, at autopsy, you can find particulate matter in people's brain. So that it is a very invasive thing, especially in high concentrations. Next. Now, the good news is that particulate matter has really gotten under control to a great degree. And this is a slide about the Clean Air Act of 1970, Richard Nixon's greatest moment. And this was when the EPA was started and they wanted to clean up the air as best they could, and ended up reducing pollutants by 73%. Of course, big auto, the oil companies, big industry fought this tooth and nail, saying, no way can we do this. We can't afford it. It's unreasonable, yada, yada, yada. Well, when the dust settled, now 50 years later, look at these unbelievable health benefits that accrued. And 230,000 fewer deaths per year. That's just astounding. 2.4 million fewer asthma attacks per year. 200,000 fewer heart attacks per year. So when you figure out all of the savings just from healthcare alone, the Clean Air Act, the cost of the Clean Air Act was paid back over 30-fold, and which is something we see time and time again. Anytime we improve the environment to any degree, we get a huge payback. Next slide. Now, as I've given this talk around the state, I sometimes get some pushback from people saying, look, the particulates are way down. At the same time the particulates are down, there's more automobiles driving. So this is really a success story. And it is a success story. There's been decades of progress. The problem is, like in real estate, location, location, location. And in fact, 40% of Americans, or 135 million, still live in areas where the air is unhealthy. And this speaks to a little bit of the social injustice of climate change. These are, inner city areas, towns all around our country that were redlined, had a highway built right through it, and where the particulate and ground level ozone is higher than what's considered to be safe. And populations of color, because of this, are 3 times more likely to live in areas with unhealthy air. And this is all from a recent American Lung Association report. And they have calculated that transitioning to zero emission energy and transportation will, by 2050, save $1.2 trillion in healthcare costs and prevent 110 premature deaths. Next slide. Now I think I'm going to hand it over to Deb Gerson, who is going to talk about extreme weather.
Hi, I'm Deb Gerson. I'm a pathologist working at Catholic Medical Center in Manchester, New Hampshire. And some people may not know pathologists are the people that are in charge of laboratory medicine and making the diagnosis of diseases by looking at tissues under the microscope. So if somebody has a biopsy of skin or breast or anything, we look at it under the microscope. So I always like to start out talking about anything that allows me to put gratuitous pictures of my kids when they were little looking cute. So here is a picture of my daughter, Rachel, when she was 1.5 years old, and we lived in Miami for when we did our training. And this was the day before Hurricane Wilma hit in October 2005. And you can see here that the wind is already starting to kick up and her hair is blowing in the breeze. And the next day, this is a picture of my husband in our backyard with a fallen tree. And really, this year was the first time I started thinking about how there was a link between human health and climate change. And what happened was, after Hurricane Wilma hit, of the 2,600 traffic lights in Miami-Dade County, only 16 were functioning. And so you couldn't get around in Miami because it's a complete disaster with traffic in Miami to start with, but things were just stopped because of this and other infrastructure things that happened. In addition to that, there were people who were directly injured during the hurricane from going outside or having a tree fall on their house. And then there were people who couldn't get to the hospital when they needed to go, or couldn't refrigerate their medications, or got heat stroke from not having air conditioning in the middle of, October is pretty hot still in Miami. So that year, there were 3 big hurricanes between August and October, Wilma, Katrina, and Rita. And scientists believe that the number of severe hurricanes is increasing due to climate change. They don't really think that the number of overall hurricanes is increasing, but because the water temperature is increasing, the severity, the speed of the winds, and the amount of water sucked up into the hurricanes is increasing. So I'm going to talk about extreme weather events. We live in New Hampshire and we're not used to the same kind of hurricane season that we had down in Florida. So what are we expecting to get in New Hampshire for extreme weather events? Well, we're expecting increasing heavy rainfall, floods, storms, and storm surge. And these events can cause medical problems by either exacerbating underlying medical conditions, causing accidents and injuries, and increasing stress and leading to adverse mental health effects. And also, as I mentioned with the Miami example, there could be disruptions to public health and healthcare systems during a storm that can lead to people having health problems because they couldn't access medicine. So why are we having increased heavy downpours? And you can see here that all across the country, the number of heavy precipitation events is increasing. So even in places that are very dry, when they have a rainstorm, it may have a lot more water in it. And the reason this is happening is because a warmer atmosphere creates more evaporation. So for every 1 degree Fahrenheit of warming, the saturation levels increase by about 4%. So the more water gets evaporated into the clouds, the more that can come down in these heavy downpours. And you can see this is much worse in New England than it is in anywhere else in the US. So this means that we're going to have more flooding. It's going to become more common over time to have more flooding. In addition to that, there are higher tides and more flooding that are occurring on our coasts around the US. So this chart shows here that between 1970 and 2020, there's been a pretty significant increase in the number of floods on the US coast yearly. And these floods can be caused by storms or astronomical tides or a combination of both, but because sea level is rising, these are actually now impacting us more often. And high tide flooding has doubled in frequency since the year 2000. So what does this mean for New Hampshire? Our predicted sea level rise is 10 to 14 inches for the East Coast over the next 30 years. This picture is from a flood in Hampton, New Hampshire, and you can see quite a bit of water here. There's a lot of properties that people own that are at risk from tidal flooding already. And these damaging coastal flooding events are going to occur more frequently, with some predicting that we'll have 4 of these events per year by 2050. So how do these heavy downpours and floods affect our health? Some of it is easy to see. Accidents and trauma can happen if you're in a flooding situation, but also when the water gets into our homes, we can get fungus and mold growing in our homes. The water can infiltrate our sewer systems and septic systems and get viral and bacterial contamination into our water system. And we can also get spread of contaminants from fossil fuel repositories and other types of waste storage facilities can get into our water. And in addition to that, you can imagine that you might have mental health problems that might follow having your house flood like this. So extreme weather events also impact mental health problems. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Bob to talk about extreme temperatures. Oh, Bob, you're on mute.
Okay, so this is just a graph of what's been going on in the last 40 years. And if you track days of heat index of 90 plus, it's increased by 7 days. And this is interesting because if you look at the warming in New England, it's mainly the winters are really warming more than the summers. The summers are sure trying hard to catch up, but a lot of the data is that the winters are less cold. But anyway, it's projected that if we stay in the same carbon emission trajectory, that by 2040, this number will probably be quadrupled. So it is definitely growing. Next. And if you just look at just the immediate health effects of extreme heat, we can attribute 700 deaths in the United States annually to it, 67,000 ER visits. Worldwide deaths are 350 deaths due to extreme heat. So what happens when there are several levels of heat exhaustion, if you will. And the first thing is, we sweat, we become a little volume depleted. And if you're not drinking a lot, or you're an elderly person who might take some blood pressure medications or a diuretic, this can lead very quickly to volume depletion, which can lead to the weak and dizzies and even passing out. Once you get the heat stroke, where your core rectal temperature is 104 or greater, this can lead actually to muscle breakdown called rhabdomyolysis, which can poison the kidneys. And if you don't cool these people down very quickly, i.e. put them in an ice bath, there is an extreme risk of mortality. Next. Now, who's at risk? Well, again, inner city populations living in so-called heat islands. It's well known that the inner city, where there is a lot of asphalt and less green space, can be 20 degrees higher than the temperature outside of town. So again, another example of the kind of social injustice related to climate change. The people who had the least to do with developing this problem suffer disproportionately more. High school and college athletes, we always see a couple of reported deaths every August when people go back to school and they're doing their 2-a-day workouts for football. and then people who work outdoors. And then finally, the elderly and children just don't have the mechanism to deal with heat as well anymore, and so they're also at higher risk. Next. Just wanted to say one thing about sweating. Sweating is our natural defense. It's the way the body cools itself, but so we get water on our skin, but in fact, it's actually the evaporation of that water that cools the body. It's just not getting the sweat on your skin. And so when it's a hot day and there's a lot of relative humidity, so the air is already saturated with water, it can't take any more water. So the sweat will not evaporate. And so sweating becomes completely ineffective. And on these really hot days, our one main defense mechanism really doesn't work. Next. Nope, now it's Deb's turn again.
Okay, back to me for mosquito and tick-borne infections. So these are called vector-borne diseases, and these are diseases that are transmitted to humans and other animals by arthropods like mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas. And you've heard of many of these different diseases like West Nile virus, Eastern equine encephalitis virus, Lyme disease, malaria. Those are all vector-borne diseases. So one of the jobs of a pathologist like me is to review peripheral blood smears in the hospital. And what happens is if a patient comes into the hospital and the laboratory receives a blood smear on them and they see something abnormal, then they send it up for me to review. So these are some pictures of what one of these smears that I see frequently in the summer in New Hampshire might look like. And here we have a pretty normal looking red blood cell. Here's another normal looking red blood cell. And these are kind of almost donut shaped, which is why they look kind of clearish in the middle. But you'll notice that in several of these cells, there are these ring shaped items that shouldn't be here. These are actually parasites. And they look exactly, in this cell, it looks exactly like malaria, but we don't see much malaria in the US unless people have traveled to other countries like South America. But if we see 4 of these malaria-looking parasites lined up like the shape of a cross in one red blood cell, this tells the pathologist that this is Babesia microti, which is a parasite that causes babesiosis. And some people will be totally asymptomatic. A lot of people will be totally asymptomatic if they have this. Some people will have a flu-like syndrome with fevers and chills. And then rare people can have a severe life-threatening disease, especially if they're immunocompromised or have other severe medical conditions. But when I see this, what I immediately think of is that they need to test the patient to see if they have any other tick-borne diseases, because it's very common for patients who have one tick-borne disease to have been infected with another tick-borne disease at the same time. And some of those can be more serious. So if you look here, this is some preliminary data from the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. And you can see that babesiosis has been increasing significantly even over the last 15 years. And anaplasmosis is another tick-borne disease, also increasing significantly. And these tick-borne diseases are increasing across the country and in New Hampshire. And there's quite a few that people will know about in New Hampshire, including Lyme disease and these others that I mentioned, and also a very rare, luckily, frightening Powassan virus infection, which causes encephalitis, which is an inflammation in your brain. And what we see here is the black-legged tick, who is the bad guy that's responsible for spreading these diseases. So Lyme disease is one that most people will know about in New Hampshire. And in fact, I personally, just in the last year, I had a friend whose father, who was previously healthy, came in heart failure to the emergency room, and it turned out that he had 2 different tick-borne diseases, and he has not completely recovered at this point. So a lot of people can tell you a story like that in New Hampshire. And what you can see here is that this shows each dot is one case of Lyme disease in 1996 and then in 2018. So what you can see is that not only are there more cases, but the cases are spreading. So they're going further north into New Hampshire. The way that this is done the dots are shown for where the patient lives and not necessarily where they acquired it. So some of these dots way over here are people who traveled to an area with Lyme disease and went home. And I'm just going to say this right up front. Massachusetts did have Lyme disease in 2018. There was a change in reporting standards that year. So that is not true that they had no cases that year. But you can see that Lyme disease has significantly increased, and it's nearly doubled between these years. And so what does this have to do with climate change? Basically, it's similar to what we talked about with allergies. Our frost-free season is 34 days longer on average in the last 50 years. So this is really great for me to go out in my garden and plant my tomato plants, a month earlier than I used to, and not have an overnight frost, but it expands the number of days that ticks can be out biting us and transmitting diseases. There are other factors that are important for this, like a host prevalence. How many deer are there? How many mice are there? And some of those are also impacted by climate change. And then one thing that is a good thing is that we can teach people how to modify their behaviors, and it decrease the number of cases of tick-borne diseases. If we teach patients that we have to wear bug spray and long pants, and tell our kids to do a tick check when they come in, or check them ourselves if they're little. Okay, so now we're going to go over to Bob Fader to talk about mental health and well-being.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Fader. I'm a psychiatrist. I did have a private practice in Manchester, New Hampshire, which I retired from recently, and since then have been spending a lot of my time in various climate groups, which are listed here on this slide. Next. So I'm going to talk with you about ways in which climate change affects mental health. There are basically two fundamentally different ways in which climate change can affect mental health. The first is direct effects of climate events on people's mental health. These are things like storms and wildfires affecting mental health of victims directly. The other major way in which climate change is affecting mental health is by causing worry and anxiety in the general population about what the future of the Earth is going to be like, given the things that are happening with climate change. Next. Okay. So there are a number of ways in which direct events can affect mental health. All of these things can have direct effects on mental health. Rising temperatures, severe storms, flooding, drought, fires, rising sea levels, and the loss of human habitat because of all of the above. Two other things which I didn't put on this slide, which Bob and Deb have already mentioned, are the vector-borne tick diseases. These can affect mental health directly by causing depression and dementia. And what Bob mentioned about air pollution causing strokes and these particles getting directly into the brain. Next, Deb. So let's look at one thing that's been looked at with rising temperatures and mental health. There is a direct relationship between temperature and suicide rates. And this has been demonstrated in studies throughout the world. There have been studies that have looked at this in numerous countries throughout the world, and it's remarkable how consistent the results of these studies are, which demonstrate that suicide rates increase by about 1 to 2% for each degree centigrade increase in the ambient temperature. And if you extrapolate this to what we are currently predicting is going to happen if we're not able to do much of anything about climate change, global temperatures are going to be increased by 8.5 degrees centigrade by 2100. So you can do the math in terms of how this is going to drastically increase suicide rates. Next. This is an interesting study that was done throughout the United States, looking at emergency room visits where the primary complaint was mental health related. And again, you can see that as the temperature goes up, the number of mental health related emergency room visits goes up along with it. Next. This study was done in Baltimore and looked at the relationship between temperature and crime. And as you can see here, both total crimes reported and violent crimes went up as the temperature went up. Next. FEMA has some interesting data that they accumulated in regard to hurricanes that have occurred in the last 20 years. And they show that if you look at the rates of suicide in people affected by hurricanes, the rates increase 26% right after the hurricane event. Next. This was a study looking at flooding in the United Kingdom, and they looked at a variety of different mental disorders for a period of 12 months after flooding events, and they found that all of these conditions, anxiety, depression, and PTSD, were significant and rose dramatically after a flooding event. Wildfires, again, can have a similar impact. This was a group of 50 different studies done in Australia, Canada, and the United States. And they also found that the incidence of major psychiatric conditions increased anywhere from 15 to 60% when they looked 6 to 18 months after people had experienced a major wildfire. Next. Looking at the issue of climate refugees, people who will have to move because of climate events destroying their environment. The United Nations Development Report predicted that by 2050, somewhere between 25 million and 1 billion people per year will be displaced by various climate-related factors. The reason there's such a huge range on this is it depends on how much is done about climate change. So even in the best scenario, the prediction is that there will be 25 million climate refugees per year, and it could be as bad as 1 billion per year if current climate change trends continue. Next. Now, to put this in perspective, as of the same year that they did this study predicting the number of refugees from climate, there were a total of 75 million displaced persons in the entire world from all causes at that time. So, you know, again, they're predicting somewhere between 25 million to 1 billion more new refugees per year by 2050, depending on the amount that we can do about climate change. And looking at the mental health effects of this, or one measure of it, the incidence of completed suicide in refugees is 50 to 100% higher than it is in native-born people. So you're going to have this huge increase in climate refugees with a massive increase in suicide is the prediction. Next. So those are all the ways in which climate change can directly affect mental health. But the way that it's affecting most people now is just concern about the future and anxiety about the future. And this seems to be impacting younger people even more directly than older people in the population. This was a really groundbreaking study that was published in Lancet, a major British medical journal, in December of 2021. This study looked at 10,000 people aged 16 to 25, and there were in 10 different countries. They had 1,000 subjects in each of these countries, which is a pretty good, broad representation of the of modern, industrialized or semi-industrialized countries. Next. And basically they asked all these young people, how worried are you about climate change? And these are the numbers that they got. Basically, 84% of the people in this study were either moderately, very, or extremely worried about climate change. And 45% of them said that the amount of worry they had was so significant that it's having a major impact on their functioning. Next. And about 2/3 of the respondents, endorsed all of these different words as ways that the climate crisis was making them feel: sad, helpless, anxious, afraid, pessimistic, angry, guilty, ashamed, hurt, depressed, grieving, and powerless. Next. And possibly the most disturbing result of this study was that 39% of these young people said that they were hesitant to have children because of climate change. And this was a pretty consistent number, as you can see, throughout all of the different countries that were part of this study. And this the fact that climate change is affecting the mental health of people is becoming a big issue. This was a headline article from the New York Times from 3 months ago. And we're seeing more and more coverage of this now in the major news media. Next. Well, the good news is that there are things you can do about this. And a group of us at the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action have actually put together a guide that was intended for therapists to help their clients deal with distress related to climate change. But there's a lot of things that we recommend in here that can be done by anybody, in a self-help manner, and I just want to go over some of those with you now. The first thing is that it's very important to realize that climate-related distress is not a disease, and it's not a mental illness. All of these things that are listed here are normal responses to the climate crisis. So if you're feeling anxiety, dread, discouragement, despair, grief, or hopelessness, that doesn't mean you're suffering from a mental illness. It means you're responding normally to a life-threatening crisis that is upon us. Next. It's important to realize that climate change is not an all or nothing catastrophe, that there is a way out of this and that we can do something about it. It's a complex problem. It's one that's going to require a lot of people to help figure it out and a lot of different interventions. And at this point, everybody needs to work with everybody else for change and develop the changes that we're going to need for that. And there is a lot of reason for hope. The future is influenceable. The United Nations studies have indicated many ways that this problem can be solved if we all get together and do it. And it's also important to realize that even small actions can sometimes have profound effects in complex systems. And the weather of the world is certainly a complex system. It's also important to develop what's called resilience. This is becoming a big topic in mental health now. The idea of resilience, which is personal strength in the face of stress that can enable somebody to survive it and get through it and actually learn something from it. And there are many techniques that help improve resilience. These include relaxation training, mindfulness training. Strengthening spiritual beliefs is very important. People with strong spiritual beliefs generally do better. Meditation techniques are helpful. Assertiveness training. Having a healthy diet is very important towards resilience and mental health in general, as is a regular exercise routine. And we're finding that simply experiencing the beauty of the natural world is very important in this regard. Next. Ways that you can do this are going hiking, next, going kayaking, snowshoeing, just going to the beach, or simply just finding a nice quiet spot to sit and appreciate nature. getting back to nature is an important part of resilience in helping deal with climate change anxiety. The other thing that's essential is strong social support networks. And it's very important to develop and strengthen these through your family, friends that you have, faith groups that you're part of, your neighbors. And there are many climate-oriented support groups that don't really have any particular climate agenda. They're really just intended to be social and emotional support networks for people that are concerned about climate change. And I've listed the names of some of these that you can find and connect with very easily on the internet. Next. And the most important thing about dealing with climate anxiety is having some sort of purposeful action that is going to help make a difference with the climate situation. We can do this as individuals by reducing our fossil fuel use, by making our homes more energy efficient, by reducing our consumption of meat and dairy products. And we can also do it through groups, which is very important. There's a large number of climate-oriented groups, including the League of Conservation Voters, which I didn't list on the slide. And it's very helpful to get involved in at least one of these groups and focus your efforts and energies around doing something about the problem rather than just sitting and worrying about it. Next. So that was my presentation on mental health issues and climate change. Thank you, and I'll give it back to Deb now.
Okay, great. So we've talked about all the bad things that can happen to us with climate change. So is there hope, and can we fix this? We're just going to run through this a little bit here. We need a two-pronged approach to save ourselves from climate change. We've got mitigation, which is where we reduce our emissions and stabilize our greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And then we have adaptation, which is where we adapt to the climate changes that are already occurring. So a couple words about mitigation. The good news is that the scientists and engineers have done a great job of coming up with most of the solutions that we need to take care of this problem. We just need to start using them more and telling our politicians that we want them to do it. So globally, wind could supply worldwide electricity consumption 40 times over. And US is already increasing our electricity generation by wind power. It's increased a whole lot. Same with solar power. There's enough solar energy reaching Earth every hour to fill all the world's energy needs for 1 year. And the cost of solar cells is coming down just as these technologies get to be used more. The costs are going way down. And some people might think that we're not going to have enough money to do this transition to renewable energy. And a little while ago, 10 years ago, they might have been almost right. But now, as you can see from this graph, some of the cheapest forms of electricity, like solar and wind, are solar and wind, which are renewable energy sources. And one study found that the entire US power grid could be transitioned to 90% renewable energy by 2035 at no net cost, with a reduction in average electricity cost of 13%. So we could actually do this and save money. And this would avert $1.2 trillion in health and environmental damages and 85,000 deaths. So really, it's not that we can't afford to switch to renewable energy. We can't afford not to. And then obviously we're going to need to be able to store our wind and solar power. So in 2016, the global cumulative storage capacity got up to 3 gigawatts, which was 2 times what it was 5 years earlier. And it's expected that by 2040, we're going to be up to 900 gigawatts. And now Bob is going to talk to us about nuclear. Bob, you're on mute.
This is a very controversial topic, but I think it's something that needs to be discussed. It's a very emotional topic, and there's been a lot of very high profile accidents. However, in Bill Gates' book, How to Avert a Climate Disaster, he and a lot of other thought leaders feel that we're going to be hard pressed to really reach that 2050 zero carbon without using some nuclear power along the way. And there are some fourth generation reactors that are very innovative and safer. These two companies, TerraPower and NuScale, are working on them. They're small modular reactors, and they can actually use depleted uranium that first and second generation reactors used to deplete it further. Obviously, they are completely free of greenhouse gases. And just as an example, TerraPower is building a nuclear reactor right now in Wyoming at the site of an old decommissioned coal power plant. So it's very close to the grid. And it's what's called a natrium reactor. So it's cooled by liquid sodium. And it doesn't require the massive amount of water which nuclear powers have traditionally needed to cool. And of course, and that's important because water is going to become increasingly hard to find. So I'm not making an opinion here. I'm just saying that we have to keep an open mind to the use of nuclear energy along our energy journey.
All right, and this is one of my favorite websites, the Project Drawdown website. You can check it out yourself. It shows that there are a million other solutions, and they break them down into all of these different categories of climate solutions. And just as an example, if you click on electricity, this is just one of about 5 pages of different types of climate solutions, including all kinds of strange things, capturing methane from landfills and ocean power, offshore wind turbines. There's a million solutions. And so we don't have any excuse not to start using some of them. I put this in here because I think these are kind of funny. There's a bunch of crazy new solutions people are coming up with. Here's one where they're painting mountains white to reflect more sun to cool things down. I don't know if I like that idea, but it's interesting. Here in many zoos around the world, including the Detroit Zoo, they are digesting animal waste to provide electricity for the zoo. This is one of my favorite ones. This is in Wales, and they're actually taking used diapers and making them into asphalt to reduce the amount of waste from the diapers and also reduce the amount of carbon that goes into producing asphalt, which is a very carbon heavy industry. And they're called Nappy Cycle, which I think is pretty cute. And here's possibly my favorite one. These are submarines that one company hopes they're going to use to put ice back into the Arctic oceans. And they might even have space on here for tourists to come and stay on the submarines overnight. So I think that sounds like a pretty good vacation.
Yeah, this next graph just really shows where our greenhouse gases come from in New Hampshire. And you can obviously see that transportation is our biggest challenge. Electricity generation is only at 11% just because we do have a nuclear power plant in the state. Next. And this graph shows our state renewable portfolio standards. And this is a little bit of an embarrassing slide. We are a definite outlier compared to all of the rest of New England. And basically, a lot of these states have committed to 40 to 50% renewable energy by 2030. And then Vermont's even gone to 75% by 2040. So that's their goals. And in New Hampshire, our goal for 2040 is 15%. So we are way behind the ball. Next. But some cities are taking this into their own hands. And there are laws on the books in New Hampshire that a town or county, like Cheshire County in this example, but a town can decide where they want to purchase their power and then just use the existing wire infrastructure from Unitil or whatever the local power company happens to be. And so then this community power coalition is a group of these particular towns. Other towns are doing this on their own, and then they can set their own renewable standards and say, we want 50% of our energy from renewables. And this will also help foster development of renewables here in New Hampshire and get that infrastructure started and take away building more infrastructure for fossil fuels. And in fact, as Deb showed on that one slide, the renewable energy is cheaper, so the citizens of these towns will end up saving money.
Okay, so just a very quick word about adaptation. This is how we help people while we're waiting for the mitigation to kick in. I'm going to skip this slide just for time, but I just wanted people to know that in New Hampshire, there are a number of projects that are ongoing by the Department of Health and Human Services already working on how to mitigate the health impacts of climate change. So they've got a number of studies, more than even what's listed on here, some where they're working with kids to make them tick safe so that they won't get these tick-borne diseases. Others where they're working with older people and heat stress. Others where they're working with extreme weather events. So there's a number of projects that are already going on addressing this adaptation issue in New Hampshire. So what do we want you to do about it, or what do we think maybe you would want to do about this? Well, real quick, we think the most important thing you can do is talk about it. And this is from the Yale Climate Communications website, and this is New Hampshire specific data. And I put this up here because a lot of people, I believe, think that others don't agree about this, and so we're not talking about it. So if we look at New Hampshire, 71% agree that global warming is happening, and over 50% believe it's affecting the weather and that it's caused mostly by human activities. So there's some agreement about that in New Hampshire. 77% believe that it should be taught about in schools, and a very high percent believe that there should be research and into renewable energy and tax rebates for energy efficient vehicles. And quite a few, very high numbers, support regulating CO2 as a pollutant and setting CO2 limits. So you see all these high numbers, you would think that everybody would be talking about it. Oh boy, my button here is very fast. But what you see is that actually most people are not discussing climate change or global warming. So we'd like you to start talking about it more. Call, write, email your elected officials, tell them that you want them to do something about climate change. Vote for people who support climate action. Join a climate group like Bob Vader talked about. Talk about it with your friends. And you can also make personal choices in what you buy and what you eat and what you do and how you invest your money. And if you're interested, I can share a link to a document about that. So I think we went a little bit over, but we hopefully have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, everyone. Such great presentations. Yeah, I hope we have a couple of minutes for questions here. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I also have a few questions for our speakers. Looks like Elizabeth has one in here. It says, any numbers for red states like Alabama and Texas about interest in topics? That's a very good question.
So I recommend checking out the Yale Climate Communications website. They have these great maps, and I don't have the numbers memorized, and they are lower for red states. Although it's interesting that if you look at more populated areas like urban areas, the numbers are more similar to what you see here. But also, if you look in California, the numbers are much higher for people that believe in this. And overall, across the country, I think it's something like 70% of people are concerned about global warming. So it's becoming something that most Americans are concerned about, at least a little bit. But I think it's become a taboo topic that people don't feel comfortable discussing, which is one of the problems, in my opinion.
It's interesting also is that it does show that if you go back to the 2000s, 2005 in that range, and you polled people, Democrats and Republicans were equally concerned and wanted to take action about climate change equally. You really couldn't tell them apart. And then it's obviously been very severely politicized. And in fact, I have a video that I'd like to work into the talk at some point. Back in 2002, Nancy Pelosi and Newt Gingrich did a public service announcement about global warming, climate change, and reducing carbon output. And, you know, and now those two wouldn't even acknowledge each other if they were, you know, in the same room. So we've just gotten terribly polarized, but there actually is a history before this where there was complete agreement.
Isn't that interesting that I feel like that's always something that fascinates me and makes you think a little bit more about who's actually making the decisions regarding, you know, our climate adaptation moves, considering a lot of, when you do look at the numbers, a really wide variety of people actually support doing something about that and actually, you know, believe in it. And maybe there's smaller numbers of naysayers than we may have been led to believe.
Well, as we can see, I know the problem is part of structural is our government. I mean, you know, you have one senator from West Virginia who is completely stopped Build Back Better. I mean, and
Oh yeah.
if you polled his state, they'd probably be for it. So that's, anyway, that's another topic.
Yeah, I feel in that case, it's probably a very personal reason that people are fighting against legislation like Build Back Better.
I'm noticing a couple of comments from Wayne in the chat that I just wanted to respond to. First of all, I noticed your comment about how New Hampshire gets 60% of our electricity from nuclear. So it is why our electricity is not one of, as Bob Dewey mentioned, it's not one of the areas that we have that's the most of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's why transportation is so much higher, for example. So it is good that we have that nuclear power plant from that perspective. And then I also wanted to comment about, I agree with you that unfortunately a lot of groups are not working to reduce that polarization that you mentioned. I'm hoping that New Hampshire healthcare workers for climate action can try to reduce that polarization by making it clear that this is about all of us. And also, we're open to members from any political party. We're not trying to suggest that one party or another has the solutions.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. No, you guys are, I saw your presentation at my local library. That was great, presents the issues and all that, but some of the groups you mentioned are really not helping solutions either in terms of the policies they endorse or in the achieving any politics. I mean, just to take a couple examples, Sunrise is aggressively anti-nuclear. I believe Extinction Rebellion is too, I'm not positive.
Now, a lot of groups are.
Right, and I don't know that the Extinction Rebellion model of trying to block traffic is really getting anywhere. I don't know whether you included Sierra Club in that group.
Yeah, they were there.
Right, I mean, you know, great old time organization, the kind of thing that I followed when I was a kid. But the old environmental organizations got their start by blocking things, which was great back in the 60s when you wanted to keep chemical factories from being installed on pristine lakes or things like that. But at this point, we have to build stuff, and Sierra Club spends a lot of their time blocking stuff. They helped fight the high power transmission lines through Maine. They block solar power all over the country. They're adamantly anti-nuclear. They have 150 million bucks a year to spend, and at least half of it is spent on things that are not going to help solve the climate problem. So I think you have to be very careful about what you choose, how you choose among the environmental groups. A lot of them are, and a lot of them have like 15 other things in their agenda that frequently get in the way of actually reducing carbon emissions. So.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I did want to tell people that I put two things in the chat. There's a link to a survey if you would like to tell us what you thought about our presentation. You can also leave your email on there if you want to be in touch with us and have us keep you updated on what we're doing, or you can put your email in the chat if you want us to keep in touch. And there's also a link to a personal actions document that someone from our group came up with that has all kinds of different possible ways that you can choose to decrease your carbon footprint if that interests you. And then, of course, talk about it to your friends and see if they're interested in doing the same thing.
I would second that and just say that we have a tremendous number of webinars, probably 4 or 5 a month, and that are some for healthcare workers and some for just for lay people. And we have just had some real nationally known speakers, and they've been terrific programs. So if you give us your email, name and email address, you'll be sure and get on the list to when those webinars are coming out. There's going to be a little fewer of them come July and August, but just because people are away, but it'll start back with great abandon in September.
Well, thank you so, so much to our speakers here, Deb, Bob, and Bob. Thank you so much for joining us. We're a couple minutes over here, but I would love to ask one closing question, if that's all right with everyone. Just to quickly kind of bring everything back home to this connection to Mental Health Awareness Month. To our speakers, I would ask, in your work in the climate crisis, relating to the climate crisis, how do you ensure that you're taking care of your own wellness, your own mental health? That is one of the reasons that we started this community conversation series, was just to open up that dialogue about how we can be taking care of ourselves, especially when working in this field.
Well, I guess I can go first on that. I really do a lot of the things that I mentioned in the talk. I make sure that I'm eating well, that I'm exercising regularly. I get out and hike and kayak a lot, and I spend a lot of time involved in what I think is productive and useful work on trying to make a difference with the climate crisis.
I can go next. I agree with a lot of that stuff. I try to spend a lot of time with my family, and I like to spend a lot of time outside in nature as well. And I think it's really helped me to be involved with New Hampshire healthcare workers for climate action, just because I feel like I'm connecting with other people who are concerned about it too. And I can see that we're all working together for common goals, and it gives me hope for the future.
Yeah, that's great. I do pretty much the same thing. I try to exercise, try to, read a lot, not necessarily all climate stuff. I will say, when we started this, speaking for myself, a lot of my climate knowledge is pretty much self-taught in the last 6 months, and I've had some sleepless nights because it's scary. And I have one of my daughters who's 36, thought long and hard about having a baby, and they finally did, and he's doing just fine. but it's I got a little bit of climate anxiety from this whole thing myself too, and it stands to reason. It's a scary thought, and every day that goes by that we don't grab the bull by the horns, it's concerning to me, I have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those responses. I think it is about time for us to wrap up. I want to say thank you again to our speakers from New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, for collaborating with us on this, for drawing attention to these crucial issues. I know we all really enjoyed your presentation and appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our attendees. Please keep an eye out for our future community conversations events. And Eric's just dropped some more links in the chat to our social media, also some opportunities for action on there, again, just to speak to the power of getting involved and what that can really do for your mental state, feeling like you're participating. So please check those out. There's also a link to a volunteer sign-up form. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. We do these community conversations roughly once a month, so keep an eye out for the next one. And a couple more events should be on our Mobilize as well. So we hope we will see you all again soon. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.